to another wonderful session with Connie Rose, our happiness coach. And today we're going to be talking about friendships and how to recognize toxic relationships. I think was the topic of the day. So I think this is a super interesting one for all of us. I think we've all experienced this in our life, or most of us have, throughout our various ages. And I think there's an interesting dance that happens between people, where you may have a friend, and you may want to maintain that friendship, even though knowing that on some levels that friendship isn't good for you. And how do you recognize that, I guess, and what can you do about it? What can you do to like morph it or evolve it in a direction that's kind of healthier for you? So
I thought we were going to be talking about relationships in general. So I've actually been thinking about.
That's okay. We can change that. Connie, you need to move to the right a little bit.
Do I?
There's something in your phone. Okay, that's good.
Yeah?
Yeah, that's good.
Good.
Yeah, so relationships are fine. I guess I was just saying,
yeah.
friendships and relationships.
Let me think. Friendships. I haven't. Yeah, I mean, if we could do relationships in general, that would be.
Okay.
That's what I've been thinking about.
That's fine. That's fine.
Let's do that.
So when you say relationships, then you're talking beyond a friendship. You're talking something more fundamental, because aren't all friendships relationships?
Yes, they are. That's right. That is correct. I just think that a toxic relationships tends to show up more in a sexual relationship. It seems like it's usually more apparent, and in what I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, so when you're in a toxic relationship, the easiest thing to do is walk away, right? But in certain instances,
that's the hardest thing to do.
Yeah. Well, when you're connected, married, or dating, walking away is not easy. When you're just in a friendship relationship, it's kind of easier, right?
Even that sometimes is not that easy either.
Exactly, and that's why in my mind, relationships and you could get into a toxic friendship where where it's so I don't think, in my mind, there's not a lot of distinction between friendships and relationships. Relationships are a deeper form, I guess, maybe of a friendship, but if you want to define it that way.
Well, you can classify all relationships in whatever format you want, but my experience has been, even if it's toxic, it's negative, it's harming, it's not working out, even though you want to walk away, it's better to walk away from it having resolved it. Meaning you come to terms with it, hopefully have a mutual understanding that it's not working out, and let's part as friends, rather than just walking away and say, screw you.
Yeah, in an ideal world, that sounds great. But sometimes you have to leave while it's still hot, because that's the only way you will be able to resolve it while you're separate. Okay. But I think that why I said it's more likely you'll end up in a toxic relationship if it's romantic or sexual is because there's more emotion involved usually in a sexual or romantic relationship. But generally, we repeat relationships that we've grown up with. So we'll repeat a relationship that we had from a caregiver or a parent with us, and how we saw their relationship, our caregiver's relationship. And we tend to keep repeating those relationships throughout our life until we deal with our own traumas and that takes a real honest look at yourself and vulnerability, because we tend to repeat those relationships because they're safe to us. Even though they might have been really toxic growing up, they might have been like an abusive, violent relationship, for example, from a parent or a caregiver. But often that person, because when we grow up, we learn that's our model of the world, and that's kind of our safety and our comfort, even if it is harmful. So we seek that out in other relationships throughout our life, and we will keep repeating that until we deal with it within ourselves. So creating the relationship you have with yourself, it will be the most important aspect you can do, that you can figure out, in order to create the healthiest relationships with other people.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
So when it comes to recognizing that, is that something that you always need help with? Like, you always need a therapist to kind of form an intervention in order to highlight that? Because if you're stuck in that pattern, you might not even be aware enough that you're in that. Do you think people can actually recognize that themselves and pull themselves out of it?
I think anything's possible. And it depends, like, you might recognize. Are you still there? You've gone blank.
They
What?
Yes, I'm still here. Sorry, I was just muting.
You're there. Okay. Okay, so hang on. What was the question again?
I was trying to deal with some noise in the house. I'm sorry. The dog came.
The question was.
Let me start again.
Yeah.
When it comes to toxic relationships, is this something that you think you always need help identifying from somebody else, like a therapist or a counselor? Or do you think that people have the potential to recognize it themselves and deal with it themselves, even though it might be very fundamental to their psyche and their sort of life experiences?
I think anything's possible. It's possible to recognize it within yourself, but it's more likely that you're going to be able to recognize it if you see it somewhere else, at least. So you might read it in a book or a self-help book, or see it in a film and think, oh God, that seems like my relationships I go through. Or it might take a friend to tell you, a wise friend or something. And then to actually deal with it, well, it depends how dedicated you are to reading the books, and but it's obviously a fast track if you go to a coach or a therapist, and someone that can deal with unraveling that trauma. And there's lots of techniques to deal with that as well. And then obviously the more you meditate, I always say this, but the more you meditate, the more you will be able to observe yourself. So you'll be able to observe your triggers and your traumas and more, and then you'll be able to communicate that open and honestly and clearly, because the foundation of any good relationship is clear, open, honest communication, because communication is the foundation of any good relationship. When that breaks down, everything breaks down.
100%. So when it comes to the steps that people go through in kind of addressing this within their lives, what would you say the process is? Like the 7 steps or whatever of kind of identifying and then dealing with it and hopefully resolving it. How do you walk people through this process when you experience someone that clearly has unresolved issues and is repeating patterns of toxic relationships because of undealt with trauma? How do you kind of go through all that?
Well, it takes someone willing enough to want to change often, or they have to change, right? So, and then it takes them really looking at themselves honestly and being vulnerable, allowing themselves to be vulnerable enough to see their own truth and to be willing to say, oh, okay, maybe this relationship actually isn't all about that other person. It's actually a lot about me as well, because we teach other people how to treat us. And that's easy to say, but, you know, often we're trapped in that safety zone of the trauma still. And we can go through life saying, oh, I don't want to be triggered by anything. But there's always going to be triggers and things in the external world that we don't necessarily like. We can't control the external world. So the only thing that we can really always control consistently is ourselves. And then, yeah, after that, so you're seeing yourself honestly, and then it's a process of continually recognizing that in yourself, being vulnerable and willing to say, oh, okay, this isn't actually about you, it's about me.
Got it.
Then making better decisions with who you choose to spend your time with.
Got it. So I think I guess it works backwards from a feeling, right? You're feeling unhappy, you're feeling sad, you're feeling, you know, something negative. And then working backwards from that is to say, why am I feeling that? And, you know, I guess it starts in a primitive way of blaming and finger pointing first, and then turns inward on sort of saying, okay, well, what is it about me that either creates this situation or allows that to happen or repeats this? And in that sort of period of, I mean, that period of vulnerability is, I mean, I imagine it's totally and utterly personal. There's no fixed time frame that people go through that, or there's no fixed way in which you can deal with that, right? That's truly a journey of self-discovery and introspection and being exposed and like working through your life experiences, right? That really got you to that point.
Yeah.
And then would you say, I mean, it's a process, I guess, of self-acceptance, right? To actually, because you actually have to allow yourself to be vulnerable means to accept that weakness in yourself. And, you know, people that aren't willing to do that are going to be defensive, right? So that self-acceptance means
also
self-esteem.
Yeah, but also there's like, it's not someone's fault, because like someone could be in an abusive relationship. Like, for example, I'm 32 now, but when I was 19, I was in a abusive relationship. Well, I've been in actually many abusive relationships, but a violent relationship. So they were violent towards me. And I actually kind of forgot about that until recently, when someone was talking about their own experience with that. And I had realized I had forgotten about that because it seems like a lifetime ago, because I've done so much work. But back then I was in that like kind of like that I couldn't see, but I was still allowing myself to be in that situation, although like, oh God, there's no blame on me back then, because I didn't know what was going on. And it took like a serious situation for me to actually get myself be pulled out of that situation. So sometimes it does take an external thing to be pulled out, or something extreme to happen where you're like, I cannot stay in this relationship anymore. But I kept going back because it was like comfortable to me. And so it's tricky. Yeah, I don't know where I'm really going with that, but
yeah, I mean, I'm trying to get at the process and you know, the steps to go from A to B, you know, to sort of recognize, to become aware, to strategize a plan how to fix it, and then try, I guess, attempt to fix it or move on as a form of fixing it.
I think like it's about, because back to use that as an example again, I did know that it was getting worse over time, and I ended the relationship before like the final big thing happened. So but I had to continue living with that person, and so I had recognized that, and so I was ready to leave. And so like you have to make the decision, like you have to have enough awareness to be like, this, I deserve more than this isn't right, and to make that decision to leave, and then not continue repeating that pattern, like continue seeking that kind of, I mean, I definitely wasn't in a violent relationship after that, but I still entered into relationships where people were abusive towards me. And there was like that manipulation thing, until I started to work on myself more, meditate, observe myself, and cultivate that self-love. Because when you love yourself fully, you kind of attract more love around you.
So yeah, I guess that's what I was getting at with the process. Like, does it always start with vulnerability, or, you know, and then building yourself up? I mean, the honesty, the honesty, like it definitely starts with an honesty, right? An honesty of like looking at yourself and truly seeing yourself, and your strengths and weaknesses and vulnerabilities, and that takes a certain level of like honesty in that introspection process. And then I guess there has to be, I guess, is vulnerability a natural next step from that, where people have to be vulnerable in order to be truly honest? Because if you're not, you know, if you're building up defense mechanisms and imagining yourself how you have previously perceived yourself, without allowing yourself to truly see yourself, and that to truly see yourself requires honesty and to balance vulnerability, right? So and then there's the process of building yourself up, like loving yourself truly for who you are, and that is an extension of the honesty. Firstly, you see yourself truly who you are, then you accept yourself for who you truly are, and learn to love yourself for who you truly are. But there is that kind of like process, right? So do you think vulnerability is a necessary step in all of this, and it's going to be pretty much universally experienced, or do you think it's different?
Yeah, vulnerability seems an important step for change, and recognizing your self-worth as well, because again, like we tend to other people are normally a kind of reflection of us in a way, like our internal state. So when we can truly love ourselves, we can truly love the other. And also like you might have to go through many relationships before you get that are kind of lessons, until you get to your kind of highest potential relationship, because normally people are kind of stuck in the lower chakras of like sex, money, power, greed, and manipulation kind of thing. And then you move up to the heart-centered more relationships, where it's like the relationship is more in a balance, because it's coming from your heart and your mind, like and your voice, like your upper chakras. So it's like a lighter feeling, where it's the relationship is in balance, because there's no manipulation going on. It's not like forced in one direction. You're not over giving or over receiving, like or giving out of guilt, or you're not being manipulated like that. And it's just there's more of a flow. There's not jealousy, and there's no entrapment. There's just like an expansive freedom and a trust and a respect. So like that's when you have the trust and respect and love for yourself, you're more likely to be in a relationship that reflects that.
Awesome. That's super interesting. Like getting back to that idea of like that vulnerability stage, right? What do you like? There's the way that I sort of see it is you can you can be supported by other relationships. You can be supported by therapists. I think it's important at that stage to get support, right? So that you're not doing this journey on your own. Like, if be it a counselor, a therapist, a friend, a parent, you know what I mean? Because you because it's hard, right? You're dealing with like core fundamental issues, and you want to be surrounded by people that kind of love you and support you in that vulnerability. And it's a tricky stage, I imagine, because you want to be able to address it and then move forward. So you know, because obviously JoyScore and app, I'm always thinking of ways in which we can appify a process, whether we can support people to do this either independently, or whether this is always going to be something that requires external forces. And maybe, you know, if we recognize this in somebody's journey of self-improvement, we can encourage them to connect with friends or family or parents, or, you know, recognize the stage that people are in and support them.
Yeah, well, an idea might be to go through a checklist of things like, how respected do you feel? How supported? How like alive do you feel? How free? Do you feel like entrapment at all? Manipulation, like, is there like an overgiving or a taking, you know? And are you
Totally.
yeah
That's a great idea. And then you can kind of work out, to your point just a second ago, perhaps where they are on the levels of relationship. You know, are they at the upper levels of free giving? Are they trapped at like lower levels? And helping people kind of like recognize it, and then giving them potential paths of how you're going to move from that. You know what I mean?
yeah, because like, especially like recognizing, like, do you think it's normal to be in a relationship where there's a lot of chaos and there's a lot of drama and it's real hard work all the time? Like, sure, relationships take work, because we learn so much about ourselves through the other and in relationships, so that's why they're one of the most challenging things. But they can also be the most rewarding, because in relationships, that's where we really learn how to give and how to receive without a high ego or high attachment. Because also, like, if you're forcing someone to spend time with you, or you're being forced, it's not real, pure, expansive love, and someone is less likely to want to spend time with you if you're forcing them, even if they wanted to originally.
Right.
And vice versa.
So what in your mind is the epitome of a perfect relationship, a kind of upper relationship that is a kind of goal that is that people would want to aspire to? And is that truly 100% possible given human nature, or is there always going to be some kind of compromise and trade-off?
No, I think it's definitely possible, but I'm very optimistic about life and people. So I think it's definitely possible to be in very healthy relationships, and I have very healthy relationships now because I've worked on myself, and I live in a state of acceptance, forgiveness, light and love and gratitude and appreciation. And the way I give now is it comes from my heart, and it's not about what I'm going to get in return. So I think a good relationship comes from the heart, not from the head. Like, it's not from that primitive state of fear and ego and attachment, because that's about survival. And so when we go from our heart, it is more of a free flowing place where there's no restriction, and there's balance then. And so when you can meet someone with your shared values, that's a very common thing in that's good in friendships and romantic relationships, when you've got those shared values and communication. So it's the shared values, communication, you've got that trust, that open honesty, and that real level of respect, and to treat someone as if it's the beginning of the relationship. So at the beginning of a relationship, you'll treat someone like you'll do everything for them. You'll be open, and you'll really appreciate them and show them how you appreciate them. You won't just tell them, you'll show them. But as time goes on, relationships tend to, more so with romantic, I think, tend to break down into a kind of
routine.
Pardon?
A routine.
Yeah, a routine, and like and you're kind of and resentment can build, right? Because initially it starts off as a resistance. So like first it's like, oh, don't do that thing, like I don't like that thing, and then over time it will be like that thing, oh, and another, that is, you're doing that thing in that way again, and that way, and they stack, and so then it becomes this big thing. And if you haven't dealt with the little things at the beginning that might have been your own triggers from past relationships that you're carrying through into this relationship, it builds up into that resistance, builds up into resentment, and then it becomes rejection, right? So then that's when you find people living in the same house but not actually in the same relationship, and they're not because they're not communicating, or that's past the point where they actually they're too tired to even overreact, because like you'll find like someone, those little things build up, and then someone will be like, oh, it's not, oh you do that thing, you've done that thing, it's you, why do you always do that thing, oh you're always late, or you're always like this. But really it's, and you think, oh god, you've really overreacted, I was only a little thing I did, but it really in their head it's a massive thing because they didn't deal with it at the beginning.
So yeah, I mean, it seems like communication is a fix for that, and acceptance, and kind of gratitude,
communication, acceptance, love, forgiveness, awareness of like where it's really coming from. Is it really about them, or is it actually about you?
And at what point, I guess, do you accept what one thing that's always interesting with relationships is that, like, in order for them to work, I think there has to be a degree of change and willingness to change from both parties.
Compromise.
But at what point do you accept that person isn't going to change? Like that is who they are. Like, you know what I mean? It's like
it's when you talk about change, and Connie, you are an expert in this, but I learned that you really cannot change people. They are who they are.
What do you think?
Change has to come from within. It's very hard to force someone to change.
I mean, I learned that the only person you can change is yourself.
Yes. So the thing is, if you, the most consistent person you can change is yourself. Exactly. And you'll find that if you change yourself, the other people might start reacting differently to you because you have changed. Right. Because if someone does, say someone is angry, right, at me for something that I didn't do intentionally, right? My reaction in the past might have been, oh well, piss off then, like, you know, like you're wrong for thinking I'm wrong, right? But now my reaction is, well, I'm really sorry you felt that, but let's look at the actual facts here, and I don't think that this has happened. And so then that person is diffused then, instead of ignited, and then igniting. So that's how someone else can change in your presence. But if fundamental changes, that person, they can change, but it has to come from within them, really. And that's, and someone could be waiting a lifetime for that. So
you know what though, I'm seeing a kind of feature of our app for this. It's like, imagine if you were if you had like the trigger change app activity, and what you basically went in and you listed the things that the other people are doing that are driving you nuts, and then what the app did was actually recommend the changes you need to make to address that, right? And I think that could be great. Like we could actually sort of say, yeah, because I think then it totally gives people strategies that they're in control of, that may or may not end up, helping the situation with that particular person. They might still have that annoying thing, but maybe you've developed a strategy now that you can either accept it or at least communicate effectively to that person as to why it's triggering you. So I think that could be interesting, because I think a lot of people have, I imagine there's a lot of commonality around triggers of other people that drive other people nuts. And, you could probably develop a kind of like list algorithm to kind of connect it.
yeah, maybe that'd be great.
That seems to be like a point where we can recognize that there are ways to solve problems, but it may end up starting with you.
Totally. And that, what I was suggesting is, like, you list all the things that your partner's doing that drives you nuts, and it says, okay, these are the changes you need to make, what I mean, based upon that. And because people don't know, and people might not, right, rather than get into that kind of like conflict, you can just change it and deflect it and kind of own it. So
this is a good point to sort of wrap it up with. And what do you think would be a good leading topic? Do we need to talk more about this, or we can move on to something new? Connie?
Anything to do with the holidays, maybe? Because we'll be getting close to the holidays.
Oh, yeah. So should we talk about families?
We could, yeah.
Families, holidays. In fact, holidays always bring another layer of complexities in lives.
Yeah. We could talk about families, I guess.
Yeah.
Because most people are going to be visiting their families if possible with the world situation.
Okay.
So
next topic is the family then.
Yeah, I think it was Ram Dass that said, if you think you're enlightened, go and spend a week with your parents. So,
nice.
Definitely a test, for sure.
Nice. All right, awesome. Well, thank you, Connie. It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. Absolute pleasure.